Hello. Hello and welcome to the Zwift Women's Ride and Run Series live panel. I'm your host, Kate Varano. I work at Zwift on the growth cycling team, and I used to race my bike. In honor of Women's History Month, we're bringing you a special conversation to help you be at your best, no matter where you're at in your training. So I've got 4 incredible women across 4 different time zones to provide a female-focused perspective on nutrition and training at all stages of a woman's life. So let's meet our guests. All right. First up, live from New Zealand, she's a day ahead of us, and she's also spearheading research on women's physiology. Her TED Talk, Women Aren't Just Small Men, has hundreds of thousands of views. Let's welcome nutrition scientist, Dr. Stacy Sims. It's an early start for you, huh?
Super early. It's still dark, but that's okay. And as future girl, I can tell you the day is okay.
All right. Next up, she's an advanced sports dietitian with over 12 years of experience. Australian born, but living it up in the cycling hub of Girona, Spain, it's Gemma Sampson. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right. Next up, no stranger to us at Zwift, and dialing in from beautiful Boise, Idaho, it's 3-time Olympic gold medalist and the world's best time trial, Kristin Armstrong. Nice to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you too, Kate. Thanks for having me.
All right. And finally, she may be last to be introduced, but she is the first American to win an Olympic triathlon gold medal. And she's now focusing on her favorite sport, running. It's Gwen Jorgensen. Thanks for being here. How's that weather up in Portland?
Yeah, I'm super excited to be inside on this call right now because typical Portland is currently downpouring outside.
Ouch. All right. So there we have it. 4 incredible women primed with expert knowledge and experience, ready to dive in. So let's start. We're going to start with some taboos and misconceptions around women's fitness. Dr. Stacy, I know this has been a big part of your life, researching, understanding our bodies. Can you tell us what got you interested in this and what are some of your findings?
So I think one of the first things was when I was at university and was told that women are anomalies and we don't study women because we just generalize from men. And I've heard it across my career of why do you want to study women? We don't know enough about men. And as an athlete and a scientist, it just doesn't make sense when women are different from birth with genetic differences. And then when we hit puberty, you have menstrual cycle changes. And everything that we do can be dictated differently from what happens with men. We see it in biomedical research as well. And then when we translate it into sport and exercise and nutrition, it just doesn't make sense that we should be doing the same as men. So over the past 20 years or so that I've been doing this, just finding that the sex differences make a huge difference when we look at how we train, how we recover, even how we sleep across menstrual cycle phases. On all of these are super important for the female athlete to understand and be able to work with physiology rather than fighting it and not meeting our maximum performance potential.
That makes really good sense. Kristen, as an accomplished athlete and coach, what's your experience with this? Do you agree with Dr. Stacy?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. The answer is always I agree with Dr. Stacy. I have worked with Dr. Stacy many times throughout my career, and she's had the luxury of working with somebody who's gone from competing in her 30s to becoming pregnant, coming back, and at the same time actually competing over the age of 40. So I've actually given Stacy experience that she needs, and she's put her practice and has helped me get through all these stages. And every time I worked with Stacy, it was a different formula because of the different timing I was in through an athlete. But not one time did she ever look at me or tell me, like, what are you doing? I mean, she might have thought that, but she never questioned me. She always had a solution. And again, throughout the different stages, I had different needs. And so 100% I agree with Stacy. And I do believe in science and data, and I am type AAA for a reason. I do follow all of this. And, one of the biggest things though, is I still will always preach, not only did I do this to myself, but now as a coach, is the biggest advantage that we all have is to listen to our own bodies. I mean, science has a big part to play, but if you depend on the data and not on yourself, you'll still fall short. So there's this combination of putting the two together and learning off of that. But also now wearing the coaching hat, I love to take what I know as an athlete and my success, but even with the athletes I work with, each of those athletes trying to hit that pinnacle of sport or reach their goals, it has to be approached differently because we all are different human beings. And so it even becomes a little bit more tricky because people, they interpret data, and sometimes data can be somewhat a power of suggestion. So if we say you typically this will happen during this time in your menstrual cycle, there are some athletes that you may work with that will literally take this and defeat themselves. No different than a heart rate monitor, no different than a power meter. So I think that data is power, but also knowing your body and working with what you have genetically is key.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you say that so many times on different workouts, in the different times I've heard you speak. Going over to Gwen, what's your experience with this? What do you wish you knew? Like, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you first started training?
When I first started training, I think a lot of the mentality around my cycle and training was that we should manipulate your cycle so that you don't get your period, or you can train well all the time. And I think now I've learned so much that I can perform on any day of my cycle. And I've learned, Kristen was talking about how things do happen with your body, but you can't let that control everything. So, I know that for me personally, I wish I would have tracked my cycle earlier. I know that my heart rate increases the day 6 to day 4 before getting my period. I know that I burn more calories when I'm on my period. So for me, I need to have more carbohydrates. And I know that I sleep worse right before my period. So I need to be focusing on rest and recovery during these times and laying down a little bit longer for a nap in the middle of the day. And so these are all things that I wish I would have known when I was growing up. And, I was training as an athlete, but the mentality and advice I was given was kind of ignore it or get rid of it.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. So let's move on here. I think this is a great time to focus on nutrition. So first of all, I'm going to open up a poll to the audience. How do you use fuel for Zwift rides? Okay. So it doesn't matter how much you train. If you're not fueling properly, then it just goes out the door. So let's go over to Gemma. You really focused on this as an advanced sports dietitian. What can you tell us a little bit about fueling for your performance for athletes, for female athletes?
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting, especially over the last year with a lot more of the athletes that I was working with, almost exclusively riding on Zwift with lockdowns and things, one of the things I really noticed there was that people's energy expenditure was increasing a lot higher. And so I think I see a lot of people they view a lot of their Zwift rides, oh, it's only half an hour, it's only 45 minutes, it's only an hour. I don't need to fuel for that. Whereas because the intensity is a lot higher, it will be a lot better for them for their performance, but also for their recovery, and especially as a woman, reducing the stress that it puts on the body by fueling that a bit better in particular with carbohydrates.
That's really good intel. Stacy, you've written a whole book on, fueling and training for women's specific physiology. Do you have anything to add on the nutrition side?
Complete false mentality of calories in, calories out. And people fall into this and they'll end up either bookending their calories at either side of the day, and they're not actually fueling for the stress the body is under. So one of the biggest things that I try to get women to understand is that we don't get fitter during training. We get fitter in the recovery around it. So if we hit a high stress point during that actual training session, which is what we're after, then you have to make sure you have enough fuel to be able to hit that high stress point, and you have enough fuel to recover from it to get those adaptations. So if we're looking at what's happening and women who are trying to delay it, or they're doing a Zwift session and then out the door to go to work, and they stay in this big catabolic state, this big breakdown state, then they can downturn their resting metabolic rate. They can cause issues with bone. They can cause issues with their reproductive system, their endocrine system, and it's all a feed forward mechanism back in the brain, and the brain controls so much around how we adapt, how we recover, how we sleep. And fueling becomes super important, especially for women, because we have a set point that's different from men with regards to threshold for calorie intake, where when we start to drop below a certain amount of carbohydrate or a certain amount of nutrition, then it triggers a feedback mechanism in the brain to really down regulate everything. So the biggest point that I try to get female athletes to understand is you don't get fitter during training. So you need to fuel in and around it in order to get those adaptations and maintain health.
Wow, thanks for that. Gwen, as an elite triathlete and runner, what's your experience with, fueling for performance?
Yeah, I think, just to kind of hop on what Gemma and Stacy were saying, I think for me personally, I found that I need to focus on carbs, especially around my period. And in triathlon training, used to do some fasted training where I'd go out in the morning before eating and do runs. And sometimes that was fine. And sometimes I would just totally bonk for, in my head, what I thought was no reason. And looking back, those times were usually around right when I was getting my period, when my body was working harder and it needed more carbohydrates. So I think bottom line, as Stacy touched on earlier in this call, that we just need more studies done in and around women and how nutrition and running and athletics and everything affects us, because there's just not enough research out there to know how we really can reach our potential.
Yeah. Let's switch over really quickly to indoor intensive training. Kristen, you're on Zwift all the time. I've done some of your workouts, super intensive. What's your fueling approach to one of those sessions? I mean, what I'm hearing from everybody is we have to listen to our bodies. There's not quite enough out there that we can rely on. So it's really being in tune with what you need. And also, I think probably a lot of documenting, how something worked or didn't work.
Yeah, Kate, it's a great question. There's so many riders training indoors these days, especially on the Zwift platform. And there is a different level of intensity that comes with indoor riding. But first and foremost, I think what I want to piggyback on is exactly what Dr. Stacy Sims has mentioned, which is that you're fueling not just for the present workout you're in, but you're fueling for the recovery. You need the right nutrients in order to fuel your body to even get through your workday. If you're a mom, you need energy to be a mom. I mean, there are so many things that we're trying to accomplish in one day. And I think that's number one, that you have to remember this. Number two is, making unrealistic goals when it comes to fueling is also super stressful, and it can become stressful. Again, I think you have to become knowledgeable around, so how much storage do we have in our glycogen storage? I mean, what was the last meal we had? How many hours ago was that meal? How long is our Zwift ride going to be right now? How intense is that Zwift ride going to be? And so I think it's really important, if you go into a ride in a fasted state, that you make sure that you're hydrating, that you make sure within those minutes that you're recovering and replenishing your body. Because I do know that Zwift is something that people use for before work. They use it for after work. So everyone's going to step and sit on that saddle at a different time of their day. So for myself, when I wake up at 6:25 and I'm leading a really hard Zwift session at 7:10 in the morning, I'll be honest, it's super intense. And for me to just go put in a lot of calories prior to the session, it's not going to make much sense. And so you have to be really, really cognizant of the fuel before, what you've done during that day, how much time before the session that you've eaten. You want to make sure you allow enough time to digest this properly. But really, even on top of all of this, one of the biggest factors when riding Zwift is keeping your core temperature down. So I don't know if how many of you have tried to do an hour Zwift session without a fan and an hour Zwift session with a fan, because this right here is going to be a night and day difference in your outcome. So don't underestimate the intensity of an indoor session. It could be 45 minutes long, it could be 60 minutes long, and it doesn't mean that you don't need to be hydrating throughout this entire session. Again, just like Dr. It sets you up for your day, and it sets you up for your body properly.
All right. So definitely hearing, it's a lot of trial and error. It's definitely understanding that the intensity of Zwift session should not be, taken lightly. We now have the poll results in, and it says 40% eat before and 29% decide on the day. So what do we think of that, Gemma?
Actually, that's more than I was expecting. Like I think what everyone's been saying before, it probably does depend on the time of day that people are training at. And like everyone has said, that if you're waking up a very short period of time before you're getting on the bike, then there isn't much time to actually digest it. So you're not going to want to eat a big bowl of porridge because you're more likely to end up throwing it up. So I think what's important here is to remember it doesn't have to be a massive meal sometimes, and something small, like it might even be like a piece of fruit or a banana or some dried dates or some dried apricots, just a small amount of carbohydrate, and getting that earlier, because I so often will see women trying to cut calories and create a deficit in their training, but then it comes to bite them on the butt a bit later on in the day because they're then much hungrier and affecting their recovery later on.
Yeah, I hear you with that. I think that we definitely see that a lot where women chronically underfuel. So it's good to remember to make sure you get plenty, especially of those carbs, well before a session. Let it settle in, and that's how you're going to get that optimal performance. So that's some really excellent nutrition advice. Thank you all for that. We're going to switch it up a little bit right now. This is another thing that's not talked about enough, but definitely impacts our training, which is, of course, our periods. Competition, training plans, they don't give, and they don't care at all what time of the month it is for us. But I know we've all experienced this. This is just a part of our lives as athletes. Gwen, some thoughts on this or how this has impacted your previous performances, competitions?
Yeah, I personally think that we should all normalize periods. I think it's something that every athlete needs to talk to their coach about. Every woman is different, and how we handle our cycle, our symptoms, everyone is just so different. And I think it's really important to track your own cycle and then as well communicate that with the coach and people you are working with, because you can make bigger gains by doing strength at certain times of your cycle. And for me, knowing more about my period has really empowered me. I now know, I used to say I don't have any symptoms because I was kind of taught to just, you can't change anything. You just have to accept it. But since tracking my cycle more I've been working with Dr. Georgie and Fitter Women, it's just been really empowering for me. And I've realized that I can feel good and perform on any day of my cycle. And, I've realized, okay, I do sleep worse during certain times and I'm more prone to feel an injury pop up at a certain time of my cycle. And so during that time, it's normally right before I get my period, I focus on anti-inflammatory foods and, tart cherry juice to help me fall asleep, because I also struggle to sleep during that time. So for me, I think learning more about your period can be really empowering, and it can help you perform your best on any day of your cycle. Because as you said, we can't pick the training and racing schedule. And so we do need to learn to perform every day.
Great. Yep. So that's definitely, this is one of the reasons I love the women's only rides on Zwift, because we actually get to just talk about some of this stuff that's it's just not brought up enough. And then when you do, it's like you open up the floodgates. Terrible pun. But we've got a poll coming up next. Let's hear from our audience. How does your period affect your training? So, Dr. Stacy, I know this is something you're very passionate about. Can you tell us a little bit more about what happens during our cycle, and additionally, how contraceptives might also impact our training and general sports and fitness?
Oh, I've been sitting on my hands wanting to interject because there's a specific thing that I want everyone to realize, that there's a difference between performance on the day, the one-off performance day, and training. So when we talk about menstrual cycle, we know that perception and psychology can supersede physiology. So this is why I don't want anyone to think that there's a negative point in their cycle, especially with regards to performance. We can use our menstrual cycle to enhance our training, because our hormones that fluctuate can allow us to go hard at certain times and really push that training boundary. And then there are times where we need to deload and recover. So I want everyone to be really, really aware that there's a difference between one point in time with performance and training. They're two different concepts to remember around your menstrual cycle. So when we talk about the menstrual cycle itself, we're talking about the fluctuation of your hormones, where we have the low hormone phase, which is your follicular phase. And this is where we are, quote, more like men, where we can access carbohydrate well, our core temperature is lower, we have the ability to push because we don't have estrogen that's crossed the blood-brain barrier to affect neurotransmitters. We can hit it hard and, like I said, recover better. Our sleep metrics are better. Then around ovulation, we have one more chance to really, really hit it hard, because estrogen in isolation is anabolic. So that means you can hit that PR. You can go in for that high training stress. Some women feel bulletproof right around ovulation, and some women feel flat and then bulletproof. But this is where you need to track and understand where you are around ovulation. And then when we get into, as estrogen and progesterone come up in that high hormone phase, we lean more towards steady state. And then the 5 to 7 days before the periods start, where women start to feel a little bit more flat, this is where we deload. We work on technique. We work on recovery to absorb the hard training that we had the 3 or 4 weeks prior to. Knowing that every woman's menstrual cycle is different. Some have short, some have long, some have regular, irregular periods. But tracking and understanding how you feel can maximize your training. And then when it comes to performance, knowing that the point on the day, there's no real difference between a low and a high hormone phase on that performance day. We have the psychology of we're not going to perform well on our period. We're not going to perform well the few days before, because of all the myths and misconceptions that have been pushed towards us from the marginalization of women across society. So I want women to understand that your period can be very ergogenic, it can be very empowering, and you just have to understand that training and performance are two different things. Then when we get into the contraceptive mechanisms, this is a completely different hormonal profile. So if you're using an oral contraceptive pill, you basically have 3 weeks of high hormone phase. Now, when I talk about it, I'm talking about it from a performance metric. Some women are on OCs for health reasons. So they have endometriosis, PCOS, heavy bleeding, and that is a time and a place to have that conversation about being on OC. But when we look from a performance metric, There are particular aspects of being on the pill that don't allow you to maximize your performance or training. There's higher oxidation when you were on an oral contraceptive pill. We know from a paper that we're just pushing out that the first 2 days of being on the OC, so your first 2 days of your pill, you can recover really well. Then after that, you flatline. And so for every increased strain point that you are doing as compared to a naturally cycling woman, you need more recovery. So you have to encounter the fact that if you're on a pill, you need to account for more recovery between high intensity sessions. You also have to realize that your own natural cycle is being downregulated, so you don't have a feedback mechanism from your brain if you are going too hard and need to pull back. The other aspect to remember about the OC is that sugar pill week, where everyone thinks they're having a period, is not a period. It's a withdrawal bleed. So that is not an indication of endocrine health or if you are actually adapting to training. So as a performance physiologist, I really ask women to have that conversation with themselves and their doctors to see if they need to be on an OC or if they can change. If they can change, then going on an IUD is a much more effective means of being able to train well because your own natural cycle is not downregulated. You have a small amount of progestin on a Mirena or a Kyla or Kelar or Skyla that really is a low dose, and your own hormones work for you, and it eliminates heavy bleeding. A lot of women end up not having periods, but they can still track their cycle through basal body temperature and ovulation predictor kits. The progestin only pill, their mini pill, is another option. We know that it does not interfere with estrogen or your luteinizing hormone pulse, so you can keep track of if you're absorbing the training. And we know that it doesn't have the same effect on the body with regards to not being able to recover well and the inflammation and oxidation that happens with an OC. So having that conversation with yourself and then with your doctor to see what is best for you as an athlete and looking after health is super, super important.
That is some incredible knowledge. I'm going to be rewinding and watching that a few times later because that is so much packed in there. What I understood is that first of all, it's our periods are kind of a superpower for our training, and that it's extremely complicated when we get into the contraceptives and how to train around your cycle. So it's something that we should be paying really close attention to. Part of that also, Gemma, is the nutrition side of it. We have different needs at different times. Can you talk through a little bit of that?
Probably the first thing that I'd like to sort of, I guess, get across is the importance of your period as being a red flag for your body being healthy. So I do see a lot of women and a lot of female athletes at all levels and ages who perhaps haven't been having a period for a while and downplaying it and be like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'll worry about that when I'm older. Whereas the challenge comes that if you are in a state of low energy availability, then it's affecting your health now. You're more likely to have stress fractures, and this can happen quite young, at a young age as well. You're more likely to have to take days off training and be more sick, which I think is a key point to put across. And the other thing I often see is if women are underfueling a lot in their training, and it then affects their stress hormones. So particularly if they're not eating enough carbohydrate, they're more likely to have a higher cortisol levels, which then can mean that they've got more body fat being stored in their body. So sometimes I will see women thinking that, I'm not in a state of low energy because my body weight is either normal or stable, whereas they might actually still be in a low energy state by not fueling their training and affecting their hormonal profile as well that way.
Thanks for that. So, Kristen, in your training, coaching, you have anything to add on this one?
It's so hard. I think that sometimes it's very interesting, Kate, because I think that, and especially in the sport of cycling, and I think Gwen could probably attest to the sport of both triathlon and running, body image is really a key factor in a lot of this. I've been on teams where sprinters want to become climbers, climbers never want to become sprinters. And at the end of the day, if I told you that I always ask an athlete, if I told you that I could make you an Olympic track sprinter tomorrow and you're a climber on the road today, would you do this? Because really it's saying you have the genetics to be a sprinter, but you're trying to be a climber. And it's always a big question for me to ask, because is the athlete willing to perform, or are they always going to be stuck in this cycle of what will happen if I eat what I'm supposed to eat or fuel myself? I've had many teammates who have bonked hard in races, 3-4 hour races. And afterwards you ask them, what did you have in your water bottles? And they'll say, oh, I had a pack of emergency. And you're like, and what did you eat today? Oh man, I did really well today. I had a pack and a half of blocks in a 4-hour race. And these are real stories. It's not poking fun. This is reality. And so as a coach, what I've done is I've learned that if you speak to an athlete about this, they're like, yes, oh, it was my fault. I'm like, control your controllables. You train so hard each and every day. You make so many sacrifices and you put so much into this sport. Let's control what we can control. And one of them is fuel intake. And with that, I've had many talks, many athletes, and it goes nowhere. But at the end of the day, what I think works best is I have to teach them through example, meaning I will write down exactly what it is they need depending on the demand of that race. So if I know that they are doing a World Cup in Europe and it's a 3.5 hour race, I know from their last power files exactly the demands it takes. And I write a script out of exactly what they should be intaking. And this has really helped the athlete. They basically will finish the race and they'll say, I've never felt so good in the last hour race ever. And once they feel that, they never go back. They get it. They get that when they finish, they didn't put on 2 pounds. Like, they're amazing. And the next day they can go do it again. And it's interesting because this is not something that I just, came up with overnight, and I needed help as well. I had actually one of the first persons I had after I turned 40 was I had Stacy go into my Training Peaks, and she would write out the script for me. I asked her, what do I need to do to recover properly? What do I need to do throughout my race to fuel properly? I said, I don't want a diet plan. I don't want you to tell me what to eat during the day. I want all recovery and I want fueling during my races. And that's how I learned. And so I think that sometimes as coaches and athletes, we think we know, we tell ourselves we know, but you have to put it into practice.
I definitely hear you on that one. I think if we can all take something away from that, like try a little bit of what you might consider overfueling before a big competition. It probably won't serve you wrong, and it's incredibly important to make sure you've got enough. We do have our results in for the last poll, and yes, 79% say that their period affects their training, and 29% say no. Gwen, thoughts on this?
That surprises me, and I think it's important to go back to what Stacy said earlier, in that training versus a one-off performance is totally different. And in training, because maybe you're not recovering, you may have to focus more on recovery, but you can perform on any day of your cycle if there is a one-off race. And so hopefully everyone can continue to learn about their cycle, and there can be more research done so that that answer can, or maybe the question can be reworded to, do you know that you can perform on any day of your cycle?
Excellent. Okay, so next phase of a woman's life. We've got our 2 Olympians here have experienced another major magical life moment, and that's having a baby during their athletic careers. So Kristen, I still like one of my favorite photos all time is you and your son with the gold medal. Talk to us a little bit about, pregnancy through training and even post baby.
It's easier said after you've done it. In hindsight, you go back and when you become pregnant, it's one of the scariest transitions that you can go through. Meaning, as an athlete, all your life, you're like, wait a minute, I don't look pregnant yet, but you are pregnant and you feel pregnant, and it's just was such a difficult time to accept at first. But my biggest piece of advice is you want to embrace this time. It's one of the most magical times that you'll experience in your life, and your body will do what it does. It will. It's so smart during this time. In fact, I always say that the reason why you have to get up to use the bathroom all night long, every night, is so it's training you so that when you have a baby, that you're getting up when they wake up all night long. It's almost like training. You're doing an internship, trying to learn what to do. But truly, there's a lot of questions I get asked all the time. So, Kristen, how did you train during pregnancy? What did you do? Did you go hard? It's just some of the common questions. And I will say that there's a lot of like, oh, should I go over this heart, this beat per minute? And I listened to my body. I was in my late 30s when I had Lucas and I was pregnant. And it's amazing what's going to happen. So imagine doing an anaerobic interval and your coach is like, can you go any harder? You're like, do I look like I can go any harder? When you're pregnant, the same thing happens. You can't go any hard, you can't do anymore. It's like your baby is taking so much extra oxygen from you that it's almost like it's like the reins that are applied. And so I, number one, listen to my body. You're going to have days where you feel like you're amazing. And you're going to have days where you want to curl up on a couch and be in a ball. And this is just the fluctuations you go through. But first and foremost, really think about activity as what it can do, not only for your mental health during pregnancy, your physical health, your circulation, but also what it's doing to help you develop a healthy child. First and foremost, throughout my 9 months of carrying Lucas, people would ask me about competition, making a comeback. And I remember every time I would say, I first and foremost want to have a healthy child, and then I'll get back to you. And so I think that it's really important to remind yourself and ourselves that listen to your body. It's the most powerful time to listen to your body. And just because your friend was pregnant like a year ago, and this is what she went through, don't expect it to be the script that's written for you. Even though your friend gained 25 pounds and you put on 40 pounds, there's a reason why you put 40 pounds on. And so treat your body healthy, just like you would when you're exercising or training, but also listen to your body.
I love it. Yeah, it sounds like the baby is in charge from the start.
And always, the rest of your life.
Yeah, right? And it's a very personal experience. Gwen, same to you. Training while pregnant, post baby. Any experience you want to share? Anything that stood out in that time for you?
It's interesting because I have always thought, and talking to other women, I feel like everyone has such different experiences, but Kristen is actually very similar to what happened with me. At least I was able to train throughout, had to have good days, I'd have bad days. And I remember asking my doctor, can I get my heart rate up? Because I do think there are myths out there that some women shouldn't exercise during pregnancy, and definitely at risk. There's certain people you need to talk to your doctor if you're at risk. May not be good to exercise, but I do think for the general population of women who get pregnant that exercising is good for you, and having that blood circulation, as Kristen was saying, is super good and healthy for you and the baby. And I would actually go out and I was doing mile repeats, I remember, and there's me with Stanley. But I remember when I was pregnant, I would go out and do these mile repeats, and I'd go as hard as I could go, and I couldn't break 6 minutes. And I didn't care how high my heart rate got, and it could only go so high. Like we've talked about, like I had an internal governor and I couldn't go any faster than my body would allow. And our bodies are smart. We just need to listen to them. And so every pregnancy is different. Every person is different. And I think focusing on and really getting in tune with your body is important during that time. I think for me, the biggest struggle was actually post-pregnancy. I was able to train throughout, and I thought right after having Stanley, I'd be able to bounce back and be right back into training. But 2 weeks later, I actually had to go back in for surgery, and I was bedridden for quite a while, and just took a lot longer for me to recover. And I think that's something that I took for granted. I think it's something that women don't always talk about, their birth stories and how traumatic it can be on a woman's body and how long it can take to heal. But again, I think you just need to go back to listening to your body, and your body will tell you when you're ready to train again.
I love that. Dr. Stacy, also a mom. Any thoughts here that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, like there isn't a lot of research done on pregnant women just because of ethics. So we have a lot of anecdotal stories, and we tend to hear like women bouncing back and coming back really quickly. But even within a woman, every pregnancy is different. So just like Gwen and Kristen have been saying, you really have to listen to your body. And one of the things that the guidelines for pregnant women are out there, they're primarily for people who are not fit. So when athletes get pregnant and they freak out and they're like, oh gosh, I need to like slow down. A lot of times they become unfit if they don't try to maintain what they've been doing, or at least a semblance of what they've been doing within the confines of what their body allows. I've worked with women who have completely stopped from being high elite athletes, and they've developed preeclampsia and other issues that a sedentary obese woman normally encounters when they're pregnant. Mm-hmm. So exercise is really important, and maintaining some semblance of it is really important, not only for you and mental health, but also we know that the placenta is a muscle. So if you get hypoxia during exercise, which happens, then it increases the vascularization of the placenta. So the baby actually gets more blood flow after you stop exercising. And during exercise, it's not hypoxia to the baby, but it increases the entire environment and makes the baby's environment healthier. And in that regard, we get genetic changes, epigenetic changes that allow the baby to be more successful under stress conditions from a metabolic stress as they get older. Less childhood obesity, less incidences of adult obesity. So all the aspects that we have for ourselves also benefit the baby directly as it's developing.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. That's wonderful, wonderful knowledge. Thank you for that. So it's so awesome to have you all here as not only the experience but the research and the expertise. It's just awesome. So not everybody's going to have a baby, but unfortunately, we cannot avoid the dreaded change. So we're going to switch over to menopause now. There's been actually a lot of positive research coming out of this lately. Dr. Stacy, I'm going to throw it back to you to talk through this a little bit.
Yeah. So I want to have everyone realize that menopause is actually the birthday for the rest of your life. So menopause in itself is just one point in time on the calendar that marks 12 months of no periods. So we can say, yay, menopause. Now I have this new life without periods and all these things. And I want people to realize that all the pictures that we see of people who hit menopause, who have a menopause and their Dowager's hump, that's all perpetuated from myths around menopause. So if we look at perimenopause, those years before that actual point in time, usually happens in your mid 40s, sometimes a little bit earlier, our hormones start to shift. So what we're doing from a training perspective won't work. We have a lot of women that are like, oh, I woke up and I felt squishy overnight. And it's because we have this direct effect from these hormones. So we might become estrogen dominant. We might not have enough progesterone. We might flatline completely. Every woman is a little bit different. But what we know inherently is that we have to change our training. We have to change our nutrition. Because when those hormones start to flatline, we have to look for other stressors that will replace what those hormones used to do. So when our hormones flatline, we no longer want to do long, slow distance. Women's bodies are very, very able and capable of going long and slow. This is another reason why fasted training doesn't work for women, because we already have the proteins within our mitochondria that allow us to use way more fatty acids. So when we lose estrogen and progesterone's ability to manipulate carbohydrate, we have to look and say, okay, well, now we need to do high intensity work to change what's happening at the muscle level to be able to use and access that carbohydrate. We need to lift heavy. And I'm notorious for saying lift heavy stuff. Because we need some neuromuscular changes to allow us to maintain power and speed. We don't need the long, slow stuff. We need to really polarize our training. One that helps eliminate all the changes from body comp that happens that we see in peri and postmenopause. It helps with bone health. It helps with maintaining vascular function so that we can tolerate heat. It reduces vasomotor symptoms. We have to look at the kinds of foods that we're eating as well, because we become a little bit more insulin resistant. So the carbohydrate that we have, yes, we keep fueling in and around training with particular lower glycemic index or higher glycemic index carbohydrates, so there's quicker hits of sugar. But every time else, we want a large variety of fruit and veg that helps maintain our metabolic control, but it also helps with gut function. So we see these women who are doing trendy diets because they hit these times in their lives where they're putting on fat and they don't understand. So they up their training, they try keto, they try intermittent fasting, they try fasted workouts, and all of that disrupts the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is really important for maintaining endocrine health and maintaining brain health and helping with some of the estrogen metabolism that we need because we're going through this fluctuation. But what I want women to understand is you don't have to be afraid of getting older and hitting menopause and postmenopause, because if we look specifically at how we change our training and how we manipulate our nutrition, then we keep improving and reaching our performance potential at that age. I'm not saying that someone who is 49 is going to be as fast and as fit as they were at 29, but we can keep manipulating and keep improving so that we can maintain our competitive self.
That's awesome. Gemma, have you noticed any clients coming to you, for your, in your practice, to focus that they're coming up on menopause, they're going through peri or postmenopause? Do you have anything to add here?
The majority of the women that I work with are a bit younger. There are a few that I do see who are, I guess, starting to enter that space, and probably the biggest struggle I see for a lot of them is fluid changes. And so, which then we were talking before about the mental, psychological impact of seeing numbers on the scales going up and down, where perhaps their weight goes up by 2-3 kilos the next day. And I think this is really important to highlight, similarly with carbohydrates in fueling and in training or carb loading, that what you eat can influence, I guess, the number and the mass that you see on the scale, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've gained that body fat overnight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Kristin, anything to add to this conversation? I know you've done a little bit of research and you also coach a lot of athletes.
Yeah, Stacy, you're hired. Next phase of my life. I can be your test guinea pig on how we get through this. Definitely, I'm not 29 anymore. And so, I'm beginning to feel the change myself. And there are some changes. I mean, this topic alone, I think because of Title IX, meaning the women who became really active in the 70s, they're now in their 50s and 60s. And so one of the most common questions I get are from women who are in their 60s, and they're asking me, Kristin, I'm just nothing anymore. Like, can you help me? And, I'm scratching my head. And so, of course, the overused cliche, knowledge is power. I'm continually trying to research and read and trying to guide people so that I lift their spirits. And we talk about goals, but really this topic is there's not a lot of research. So there's a lot of trial and error, but I can tell you that things do change. I mean, the gaining of fat, the bone density, all these things, your quality of sleep, and the fear of, can I stay lean? The bloating that Gemma was talking about, you wake up and you're like, why do I have sock lines today? I haven't had sock lines since I was competing, and I was drinking too much of that. Oh, I was part of that Gatorade generation. Anyway, so all these different things. And then you have all this advice of like, there's all this like hormone therapy, and there's a lot of research that shows that that's not the direction either. And so, like Stacy says, it's something that it's not what the pictures show you. It's just a matter of pivoting just a little bit to really figure out what works for your body. But some of the things that I've personally done recently is I've really worked with my macros, meaning if I told you what my protein intake has been since I've retired, you all might fall over, because if should be intaking around, let's say, 130 grams of protein a day, because I'm still very active, and I typically am getting about 40 in, exactly, right? This is just truth. And so I need to shift what I'm doing as far as what nutrients I'm putting in my body every day. I also have just recently started a strength training program. It's not HIIT class. It's truly like what a bodybuilder would do. And it's kind of scary because we have this thought in our brain that we're going to get big. And my personal trainer said the best thing to me. They're like, if you think you're going to get big and gain muscle in your upper 40s, like, you're kidding yourself. Let me know if you start getting big, Kristen. I'm like, okay, it's a scary thing, but it's really important. And then also I find that Zwift has helped me keep the intensity up, just like Dr. Stacy says, intensity is important. We can do long, slow distance every day. And so there's so much to learn. I can talk about it forever, but I'm going through the process right now and learning on my own.
I love it. Yeah, what I'm hearing here is we can optimize. Yeah, I bet. I'm hearing we can optimize our nutrition and training at every stage of our lives as women. And that's awesome. And I want to delve into each of these fields. So definitely check out Kristen's podcast, Gemma's website, follow what Gwen's doing on Instagram and her competitions. And then, of course, Stacy Sims, Dr. Stacy Sims' book. Right now, I know our audience is going to have some questions. So let's take a look and see what kind of input we're getting from everybody listening. Okay. How does menopause affect training? My feedback loop is different every month or every few months because so much is changing. So who wants to take this one?
I'll take it.
Stacy, let's go.
Yeah. So in perimenopause, again, because you have so many different hormone fluctuations, this is the time to really start changing your training, because we know that most of the body comp changes happen leading up to that one point in time. So this is a time where you're really polarizing training and you're listening to your body. Some days you can go really hard and other days not. It's also looking at how you were training. So we know that in this time period, it's 2 days hard and then 2 to 3 days of more active recovery and then another 2 days hard. And you work in 2-week blocks so that your body has the ability to absorb the hard training. And I cannot emphasize enough about the heavy resistance training. Like, that is so important to be able to maximize what you're doing on the bike. So it's a high-end intensity and it's the resistance training. And that goes so far for improving performance on long races, short races, and really in the back of your head, that weekend 4 or 5 hour ride or however long you're going is not essential, especially at this point in time in your life.
Excellent. All right. We have another question. Waiting for our next question we have. All right. It's so hard. How to know if I'm getting enough carbs? Oh, I've heard that before. Or too many, as I'm getting old and more carb sensitive. Yeah. Are carbs our friends? Who wants to take this? I'm thinking Gemma might have some input on this one.
I think what I like to encourage people to do is to focus their carbohydrate around their training, so particularly before, during, and after. And I do see a lot of women in particular, that's when they're almost trying to shy away from it, when that's actually the time when your body is eating it and using it up for fuel to energize that training as you go. And this was really apparent to me a couple of weeks ago. I was using one of those, the glucose continuous glucose monitors on my arm, and I had a cookie like maybe 5 minutes before I went for a ride. Blood sugar levels went sky high and then sort of came back down again. But then I had another one maybe halfway through the ride and just nothing happened. And what I see a lot of people, they're cutting the carbs from inside their training, but then they're eating it like maybe later in the day or in the afternoon or in the evening when they're sort of like they're sitting and not doing any exercise, which then makes their blood sugar levels go up. Whereas actually, if you focus it and have more of that carbohydrate in the training, you don't see those big spikes because it's being used straight away.
Great feedback. That's wonderful. All right. Next question. Let's see. All right. What about being on HRT? Does that have the same effect as OCs? Dr. Stacy, do you have any input on this one? There we go.
Yes. So HRT is very interesting. There's so many different formulations, but the dosage is different. And it is not the same as an OC. So OC is a steady state hormone profile that is 6 to 8 times what our normal body is. Now with HRT, it works to have the lowest possible level for function. But then the other thing about HRT, although they say it's hormone replacement therapy, it does not do the same thing in our body as our natural hormones. It will help attenuate some of the negative impacts that we have with our hormones flatlining, but it doesn't do the same thing that exercise does. So if you are using menopause hormone therapy to get through vasomotor symptoms, you also still have to pay attention to your training and nutrition to be able to manipulate body composition and performance.
Fantastic. All right. Let's see. Got another question coming up here. And any advice for running my first marathon on my period? Gwen, I'm going to throw this one over to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that when you get your period, you don't stop running. So it's the same thing. And I've run a marathon. I've won world championships on my period, which are 2-hour events. I actually recently switched to menstrual cups, which can hold more blood than tampons. So if you are worried about a heavy period and it leaking, I'd look into something that may work for that, such as trying a cup or a Super Plus tampon or whatever it is that might work for you. But don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. I've been at the highest level of competition on my period and had great results. So you do it in training, you can do it in a race for sure.
Excellent. All right. So we're unfortunately at time. I just want to thank our incredible guests, Gemma Sampson, Dr. Stacy Sims, Gwen Jorgensen, and Kristin Armstrong. If knowledge is power, you are all absolute superheroes. And thank you for helping break down a lot of the myths and misconceptions around women's training and fitness. So much incredible information to come out of this. And I think a lot to follow up on after. So thank you all for joining us, and keep training.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.